Hello, good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the second half of our Candidates Forum. We will now be hearing questions from our two mayoral candidates. This evening we have with us Ethan Baker and Dave Henderson. We will begin with a 2-minute opening statement by Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us today. Thank you to all of you who are watching out in the audience, who are watching later on your computer, on the TV, on your phone. Thank you to Dave for doing this tonight. I think it should be a very interesting conversation. I have to say, I lost my first bet. I thought for sure Dave would wear a tie tonight. He didn't do it, so we're off and rolling. One tie, one without a tie. I am Ethan Baker. I'm currently the Mayor Pro Tem on Troy City Council. I've been on Troy City Council since 2015 when I got elected in November. It has been my honor and privilege to be a Troy City Council member for the past 4 years, even through the highs and lows of what we've experienced here in our city. I am an attorney. I have my own law practice here in Troy. I'm married to Bethany. I have 3 wonderful children. We are a very happy family here in Troy. We chose to move to Troy just over 10 and a half years ago, and we've been here ever since, loving everything about our great city. 9 years ago, just over 9 years ago, I got asked to participate in our homeowners association board and in the neighborhood. And for the past actually that was 10 years ago, for the past 9 years I've been the board president. So for some reason, year after year, they keep re-electing me as board president. I think it's because I've got a good track record of working with my neighbors, helping them out when they need it, putting together good social community events, and really working hard for public service. Our city is at an interesting place. We've had a lot go on. I think you'll probably hear in about a minute and a half or so that my opponent is a neighbor, not a career politician. I think that could be because people think that I'm a career politician because I have run for public office before. I don't shy away from that. I think it's been the greatest thing that I've done because it's given me the opportunity to talk to thousands and thousands of Troy voters. I know what they're interested in, what they're looking for. They're worried about our development, our green space. They're worried about transparency and trust and ethics in our city. And they're looking for a council and a mayor who's going to listen to them, who's going to represent their interests and pay close attention and have good decorum. So I ask for your vote on November 5th. If you're looking for more information, I'm at bakerfortroy.com.
Mr. Henderson.
Good evening. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for doing this event again. And thank you to the residents that come out and support this event each time it takes place. I've had the privilege of living in Troy and or working in Troy practically my entire life. I was born here in 1961. I graduated from Athens High School in 1979. My wife Kelly and I have been married for 37 years. We have 2 wonderful adult children and 7 of the best grandchildren on the planet. 4 of those grandchildren live here in Troy and attend Troy schools. My father was invested in Troy as well. He was the special education director for the city of Troy, retired from Troy schools in the late 70s. And my sister still lives in the house, you'll appreciate this, that I was raised in on Kirkton. So we have long-standing roots in the city of Troy. I've had the honor of serving you for the past 8 years as your councilman, including 1 year as Mayor Pro Tem when it was my time in the rotation. And I believe I've honorably fulfilled the needs of the community I serve. I've helped make tough decisions that favor the city. I've attended an estimated 200 ribbon cuttings, grand openings, grand reopenings, and special events in the last 8 years. I've been the standard bearer for marijuana, not having marijuana operations in the city of Troy, trying to cut down on the amount of grow operations that we have. And since we lost our the election in Troy with regard to marijuana lost by 1,000 votes, I was the standard bearer for getting rid of the retail, or not having retail operations in the city of Troy. The mayoral position in Troy is one of 7 equal voices that represent our residents and business community fairly. I've served during times of great harmony on council, and I've served in times of 3 turbulent periods. We've always survived and come through for the better with each of these experiences. And I look forward to continuing those efforts on City Council as your mayor.
We will now begin the question and answer period. Please describe what you think is an appropriate relationship between individual council members with the city manager and the city staff. Mr. Baker.
It's a great question. It's certainly come up a lot over the past few years, especially as it relates to Brian Kishnick and his role as our city manager. I'm not sure that question can be quantified in numbers. I don't think it's about the amount of time you spend or how you have a relationship. I think it's about how you respect the community and understand that there are ethical boundaries that we need to all have. I think there's nothing wrong with being friendly, but as I've told many city employees, I can be friendly, I can't be your friend. I don't think that's appropriate, and that's something we need to be very careful of, because as we've seen, that relationship can lead to increased problems in our city. And we all have differences of opinion on this, and we're all human, but at the end of the day, we have an ethical job to maintain our boundaries as council members. We oversee a city manager and a city attorney. Like I said, we can be friendly with them, but we shouldn't be friends. It's gotten us into trouble in the past, and it would again if we did.
Mr. Henderson.
Same question. I'm a relationship builder. That's my nature. That's how I've always been. That's how I'll always be. We have a charter that states the city manager acts at the request of at least a majority on council. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with that individual and let that individual know personally where you're at with various things. Again, having an open relationship and having the communication between the two of you that builds trust and builds the ability to get good, quick responses is very appropriate, and that's how I would continue to serve the city.
What would you do to prevent Troy from losing the residential-business balance? Too many executives like to bring in as much money as possible, destroying the nice community. Mr. Henderson.
So our tax base used to be, and still is kind of close to that, 60% on the business side and 40% residential. So it's a critical piece in our community to embrace the business community and to allow that dynamic to afford us all the great things that we have in the city of Troy. So we have to welcome, we have to embrace businesses, and our daytime population increases a great deal because of our business community. So it's important to nurture that and to have businesses thrive in our community.
Mr. Baker.
Businesses are a key part of Troy's economy. They're a key part of our neighborhoods. They're a key part of our tax base, which provide us with the great resources we have in the city of Troy. We can't do anything to hurt that or to harm that. I think that you have to have a proper balance. Obviously, the residents, we can't forget, make up the other part of the city, and we represent the residents as well. So there always is a balancing act. Troy has done very well coming back from the recession of 10 years ago. It's worked very hard. That's been done with good leadership at certain points. It's also because our businesses have grown and thrived in the city of Troy. At all the ribbon cuttings we go to, we quite often hear, Troy's been really friendly to our business. They really helped us get into this city and get going, and they really appreciate that. So we do have a reputation as being good for business, but we always have to remember that our residents matter just as much, and there is always a balancing act.
What are your thoughts regarding development of city center property? Remain a green space, Troy's version of, quote, Central Park, or become a crass commercial development going to the highest bidders? Mr. Baker.
I think I know what the answer to the questionnaire has. Here's the reality. We learned 2 years ago that it's a very, very controversial and important issue in our city. And based on that, I don't believe we can move forward with any kind of development of the Civic Center without having a vote of the people, without fully engaging the people with proper community engagement, letting them know that we're listening to you, we understand where you're coming from, and we want to hear what you think is best. Personally, at this point, I've come to the conclusion that the majority of Troy citizens believe the Troy Civic Center should remain mostly park-like, and that we should keep the green space in place. We definitely need to enhance it, though. I believe it's underutilized, and there are things we could do based on all the previous council's reports and plans that they put together to make it a better place where we really need a community gathering place in Troy, and the Civic Center seems like the prime spot to do that. We also have aging facilities on the Civic Center campus that could use a boost of funds. How we pay for all of that is always the question. If we can work something out with the Civic Center and make it a better park for all of our citizens, and maybe put some money into the buildings in that area, we'll all be better off.
Mr. Henderson.
Yeah, we did learn a great deal a couple years ago on the Civic Center property, and One of the things that I was pushing for, and I hope to keep pushing for, is a vote of the people. You know, what do we do with it? Do we leave it alone? Do we make a central park out of it? Do we do some sort of a hybrid where we have some development that goes on that dovetails with a park-like feature? All of those things are great ideas, but as Councilman Baker indicated, you know, who funds that? If you have a great partnership with development or developers, a lot of times you can get a lot of those things paid for by the developer and have some really nice features. But if we're going to take it on ourselves and make just a park out of it, you know, we need to find the funds to be able to do that. It's a question that needs to be pursued, and I think we can only do that with a ballot initiative or a survey or series of surveys to find out.
Please explain what you believe transparent government is. Mr. Henderson.
So when I first got on council, we all supported putting the checkbook online. You know, trying to make all things city government related visible to the people. I have not been an advocate of closed sessions. I don't know if you've been paying attention the last couple of years, but I don't like going into closed sessions for anything other than litigation or contract negotiations and some personnel issues. I always fight against trying to go into meetings where the public is not fully aware of what we're discussing. I would rather discuss some of the critical issues right in front of the people on camera so everybody can see what's going on. So I'm an advocate and always have been of transparency. I'm an open book. Facebook, you can find me on Facebook, and if you've got a question, bring it up. Always willing to talk about it and discuss anything out in the open with people.
Mr. Baker.
Transparency is key to our success as a city government. I think that we have some key differences on this issue, Councilman Henderson and I, and we've experienced those, and you may have seen them over the past year or so, or two at this point. You know, it's one thing to talk about transparency. It's another thing to actually vote for transparency. I did make a vote a year and a half ago to release a report that had previously been kept private, and I did that in the name of transparency in an effort to help rebuild trust in our community. Just not going into closed sessions is not what transparency is about. Obviously, closed sessions play a role in our government. Sometimes they're worthy, sometimes maybe they're overused. But the reality is, the more we can be transparent with our community, the better off we will be in earning their trust, which will make us better able to govern them and have them come along with us when we have important decisions to make. You know, you can't be partially transparent. You're either transparent or you're not. And it seems like we hem and haw as to what that is going to look like in our city. You have to go all in or all not, and I really stand for that.
Have you taken any campaign contribution from developers that have active or recently active projects with the city? Do you believe candidates should refuse these contributions? Mr. Baker.
It's a very timely question. There's a lot of development issues going on in our city. For this race, I am not taking any money from any developers. In fact, I did receive an online contribution from Kamal, who's a very well-known developer and person in our community, a couple weeks ago. Shortly thereafter, a very controversial project came up, the Crooks Road townhomes just north of Waddles on Crooks. And I called Kamal. I said, Kamal, I appreciate it, but I don't think I should be taking this money from you. And I returned it to him. And trust me, returning money in a campaign is very difficult to do. But you know, I did that, and here's why. I believe that no matter what, there's always influence. And you may try to fight against it, but it's really hard to take a donation in your left hand and not vote for that guy with your right hand. And you know, in this day and age, with what's going on with our development, the trust and transparency issues, and all that we've gone through, I think the best course for me is to eliminate that risk completely. And I think that all candidates at this point should, knowing what a controversial issue some of these development projects are in our city.
Mr. Henderson.
So to answer the question about whether or not the money is an influence, I've had money from developers or people that do business in the city building anything in the past. One of them in particular wanted to, being a realtor, this is a big problem for me, but he wanted to pave his road, and I had his house listed on that road. I literally recused myself from the vote and then lost $1 million listing. So this has hurt me financially with some of the decisions I've had to make. Have I accepted developer funds? Yeah, I have, but I don't look at I don't look at that as a bad thing. Every person on council has accepted funds from a developer in the past, so those things happen. It's not illegal, it's not immoral, it's not unethical. It's a matter of life, and people do this. If I have a track record of being able to make decisions that are not influenced by anybody's financial input in my campaigns.
Okay, this question has 3 questions within it, so we'll take one at a time. It says, please explain your vote on 3 important council votes. The first one was the release of the Plant Moran investigation to the public. Mr. Henderson.
I'm going to have to.
You mean the Lang report?
I don't know.
Can we
That's,
talk about the Lang report instead? I don't know that.
it just says,
I'd rather talk
please.
about the Lang report.
I'm assuming that's what they're referring to, but that would be my
Yeah,
assumption, not
did we even
the specific.
have to vote on releasing the Plant Moran report? That was in a close. We can't talk about it. It's a close.
All right, I'll go to the next one.
Unless you want to talk about the Lang report, we can talk about that.
All right, why don't you do that?
Okay, so the Craig Lang report was a report that was put together on the the former city manager that now rests in prison. We, as a body, we voted to protect that because it was an attorney-client privilege report. I even recall my competitor here chastising Craig Lang when he came in to tell us that we should release the report. And I remember Ethan telling him that he was inappropriate coming in and putting that kind of influence on us. And then he proceeded to protect that report. The day that report was released, Ethan Baker turned on it. It was April 19th of 2018. And not many people realize what that day was, but I do. April 19th of 2018 is the exact same day that Doug Tietz filed to run against Ethan Baker for state rep. And that evening, Ethan Baker voted to release that report. So although there's an indication that he is not a career politician, some of the decisions he's made in the last couple years have been strictly geared towards what's going to get him the next vote in the next election. So that April 19th, you can look it up. I'll supply you the links if you want to look.
Mr. Baker.
You know, April 19th, I had no idea. You and Doug did a lot of work to figure that out, Dave. That's fun. I had no idea.
No, I did that.
That's amazing. Okay, so good job. Doug had called me 6 months before that and told me he was probably going to run, so it had nothing to do with that. I struggled with that decision. In summer of 2016, Councilwoman Abraham brought a resolution to release that report. Brian Kishnick was still employed by our city, and I thought it would be a bad precedent to release a report where employees who were having to work with Brian Kishnick still would be at risk for having their confidential statements released to the public. I didn't think that was my job. I thought that was up to them. I'm an attorney. I understand the privilege very well. A year and a half later, Brian Kishnick gets fired. And I struggled for that whole time listening to the community, listening to people who mean a great deal to me, come to the decision that the right thing to do was release that report. In fact, at that meeting, if it was April 19th, I tried to do a compromise first that actually had some support, but it didn't have full support. And I said, we either, like I said about transparency, you're all in or you're opaque. So I said, you know what? The right thing to do for the city and to try to heal is to release that report in its entirety. And as the client, as we were in the city, as the client, I agreed to release that privilege, and that's perfectly allowable, and it was the right decision.
Okay. The next part of the question is the proposed payment to the former finance director. Mr. Baker?
Being very cautious that we're always potentially in a litigation situation, I did vote not to approve a payment to Tom Darling, the former finance director. I thought it was let me think about how I can say that without saying anything that I might know. It wasn't the right thing to do. I thought that based on what I'd read in the Plant Moran report, what I'd known about Tom Darling, it didn't make sense to me to pay him around $100,000 as severance. It just didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now. So I fully stand by that decision. And I understand that some felt a different way. That makes sense. But in my heart of hearts, knowing what the city had gone through and where we had been and gone with Tom Darling, paying him $100,000 or just over, it just did not make sense to me.
Mr. Henderson?
So the payment was for a severance. We released him. It was a severance package that was going to be put together for him. The severance package, since it was denied and we're now litigating, could cost us even more than that. So often we take the advice of our city attorney to either pay these settlements out or litigate them. And if we litigate them, a lot of times it costs well over what it would have cost for a severance. So I know I've heard the rumblings from people that we just wanted to pay him off and sweep it under the rug. That's not the case. We wanted to pay him off so that we could move on, give him what was due him, and not have to end up in a long, lengthy legal battle that may cost us even more than his severance.
Okay, the third part of it says the new resolution to begin an investigation of council itself, citing the culture of complicity mentioned in the Plant Moran work. Mr. Henderson.
I'm not sure that was a question necessarily. I'm explaining.
You're
okay.
explaining your vote.
So this perchance ended up on our agenda for Monday's meeting again. So this keeps resurfacing. And one of the things with this culture of complicity, we had Plant Moran do an investigation, if you will, and it was really the initial stages of this investigation were to find out if there was any other financial issues that may have occurred under Brian Kishnick's regime, if you want to call it that. And they really didn't find any. They found some nickel and dime stuff, nothing major, nothing that rose to the top. But what they did is they interviewed employees, and they got nuggets of information from employees that they don't even share that information with us as a body, and then they write an opinion piece about what they felt was going on at the city at that time. And I have a real problem with opinion pieces if you can't show me your work. Show me the data, show me the details, so that we can make an assessment and a judgment as to what happened. Now, this investigation that's coming our way, or that Councilman Baker would like to have on his brochures and hit me with, is simply trying to verify whether or not the City Council was complicit based on these reports that we can't even look at.
Mr. Baker.
Thank you. So much to go with there, only a minute, so let me try to be efficient here. First of all, to talk about Brian Kishnick's issues, his nickel and dime stuff is appalling to me. It was far worse than that, and we all know that in this city.
The internal stuff.
Yeah, well, the report speaks for itself, as it does speak about the culture of complicity and what this council, potentially what role this council played in that. What it doesn't say is specifically what this council did, and that's what I think needs to be investigated and looked into. I am bringing forward another resolution that I'm trying to get passed on Monday night, which is limited in scope to what I'd previously brought, but I think it's extremely important for transparency, for a teaching moment, to say, hey, this is where council went wrong, this is what council should have done, and let's try to move forward in a healthy and positive way. Anything short of that is sweeping it under the rug. Listen, when the check engine light in your car goes on, you don't just keep driving and try to ignore it. The reality is you run the diagnostics and you find out what's wrong with the car so you can move on and drive safely. That's what the city needs. We need to do the diagnostics, finish the last piece of the puzzle, and then we can all move forward in a healthy way. It has nothing to do with my campaign or my brochure. I've been talking about this for months, and I'll continue to talk about it for months after.
So as I mentioned in the first portion, we had at least 7 or 8 questions about trust, transparency, and this will be the final one for this portion. What reforms are needed to restore trust and confidence in city government? Mr. Baker.
First things first, we have to, the more transparency, the better, right? I think we start with this investigation of council to find out where we went wrong so we can move forward and have it be an educational teaching moment for this council, for the next council, and for a council 10, 15 years ago, because history can repeat itself. We all know that. We run the risk. If we don't figure out what happened, we can't move forward in a healthy and positive way. The other thing we've come to realize fairly recently is that we have a Troy City Council code of ethics that if you violate something on there, there's no ramifications for doing it. So there has to be a new ethics policy put into place that has teeth put into it. It's simply not right that we are entrusted with your tax dollars, entrusted with your public respect. Well, respect may be an overstatement. And we have no consequences if there's an ethical violation. The next part of that is better education. Our council members, for the past 4 years, we've had very little training on what it is to be an ethical council person. As some have said, you just know ethics. But you know what? Obviously not. We've seen that the ethical lines have been blurred in our city, among our council, among our former city manager. So those 3 things are really important.
Mr. Henderson.
So the trust factor, restoring trust, the Plant Moran report did a lot of great things for us. We have a very nice document that was put together outlining a lot of things that we needed to do to fix various processes within the city. And as we went through our study sessions and we talked about those things, Mr. Miller has already addressed most of them on the fly as we go. They would be presented with these issues, and they would fix processes based on what was presented to them from Plant Moran. So we've done a lot of those things. We fixed the whistleblower process 3 years ago when Brian Kishnick's problems first arose. We put him on a program, and we fixed a lot of the processes internally that needed to be repaired. We put him on a plan that was approved by all of council. So we have already done these things. What's unfortunate is we keep looking back. I propose that the new mayor should look forward rather than look back behind us. And yes, looking back behind us, we can determine what we've done wrong. And I think there's no question that there are some mistakes made, and one of the biggest ones is in prison right now. And we need to just move on from that and do better as a city.
Troy's library millage is expiring in June of 2021. What would be your position on how to move forward at that point? Mr. Henderson.
The millage has proven to be able to fund the library, and we have a great library, and the people will probably approve that millage again if presented to them. There's been talk about increasing that millage to maybe open the library 7 days. And fund it a little bit differently. There's been another mention of maybe even taking it out completely and funding it completely out of a different millage. So there are a lot of things that could happen. I'm in favor of status quo. Let it happen the way it's happening now. Let the people decide that millage is going to happen again. And 7-day library, if it fits in the budget, it fits in the budget. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We are not the only library in the area that's closed 1 day a week. We just happen to be closed Friday instead of Sunday, where most libraries are closed Sunday and not Friday. So I think things are going pretty well.
Mr. Baker.
I think that, June of 2021, our economy could look substantially different. We already know that the millage we have for the library isn't fully funding the library at the level it should be. We're supplementing out of the general fund for certain repairs, for certain things. And all the statistics show that the more minimum wages go up, that everything is costing more at the library and the millage isn't going up. So we do have an issue that we're going to have to face when that millage comes up for renewal. Whether it gets renewed at the same level, whether it gets increased, whether we take it out and put it into a separate library board, those are issues that the next mayor is going to have to work with council, and they're going to have to figure out how to do it. I'm all for listening to what the people are looking for, what they want to do. I think we've shown in 2015, the millage was renewed with just over 70%. I think that was quite a testament to the hard work that the Kathy Russ, the library, does to provide a good service to everybody. My kids love the library. We're going frequently, and it's always packed when I'm in there. So it is a community asset, and I'm thankful to see that we are doing so well with it. Opening it 7 days would be great. I've tried to do that in the past. We really have to figure out what the people will want and what we can support financially.
What is your position about the plans for the Troy Civic Center property? Mr. Baker.
Okay, we talked a little bit about this before. Again, a vote of the people is what's necessary if there's going to be any dramatic change at this point. How we get to that vote and what question gets posed, that's been the million-dollar question for us for a few years. Again, I think that the majority of people in our city are looking to keep that as a park-like setting with enhancements, whether that's fountains or artwork or an amphitheater of sorts. That's something to be determined. We've got great reports that were done by previous councils and citizens in our community. We have to take those again and revisit what we really want to do in this day and age, knowing that things have changed since 2004 and 2008, and there's always going to be room for improvement. Whether that includes potentially, parceling off some of the property in front of City Hall that's kind of wasted and has great value, and use those funds to help make the park a better place for our community, that's always a possibility. But then again, maybe that's not what the people of our community want. It really comes down to community engagement, meeting with the people, not doing dog and pony shows and trying to force something down them, but getting good input so we can move forward in a positive way.
Mr. Henderson.
Yeah, we were supposed to do a survey here this past year, but things got a little bit funny in the city. So some of that has gotten sidetracked for us. So my goal as mayor would be to try to figure out what the people really want there. And yeah, it could be a real nice park if we could find funding for that. It could be a real nice development. It is 106 acres of the most valuable property probably in all of Michigan right now. 106 acres, as we talked through that whole exercise a year and a half ago or 2 years ago now, can fit in the entire downtown Royal Oak on that piece of property. So it is a really valuable asset to the city. What we do with it, yes, the people need to decide. We need to figure out a way to try to get that data, whether it be a ballot proposal or a survey. We need to get on that and get that fixed.
In your opinion, what is the greatest challenge for the city of Troy? Mr. Henderson.
Greatest challenge right now, I think, is develop. We haven't really talked about development too much, but development development is good. You have to have good, solid development in a community, or the community withers away and dies. So, good development is good. What we have right now is a disconnect between residents, developers, planning commission, and our master plan. So what happens is a developer buys these pieces of property that have been sitting around for decades in families, and now these things are worth $500,000, $750,000, and they're retiring and selling these projects to developers. We have to figure out a way where developers can have a predictable service from the city to allow them to know what is allowable, what the city will approve, and what the neighbors in transition areas especially will accept as neighboring partners.
Mr. Baker.
There's no question development is a necessity for any city to continue to grow and to thrive. But see, the disconnect, I think, is that the residents aren't being heard. All I hear every day when I'm knocking on doors, when I'm talking to people in the community, is that they're sick and tired of us overdeveloping Troy. The green space is going away. Developers are coming in and trying to squeeze as many units onto a small piece of property as they can find, and people have had it. It's not why they moved to Troy. It's not why they've stayed in Troy, and now they're sick by what's happening. And I don't blame them. We have an outdated master plan at this point that was put into place at a time when our economy was in a much different state. We need to update the master plan and realize that neighborhoods don't want apartment buildings in them. I voted against proposals like that. They don't want easy storages across the street from their developments. I voted against that. People are rightly concerned about the influence that developers have had with our current mayor, with some on council, and what we're going to do to fix that. And that is the one issue that I hear more than anything else in this entire city, is please do something about the development. It's increasing our traffic. It's making things terrible for our city. Please help us.
The League of Women Voters Troy area would like to thank the candidates and the audience for their participation. Voters will be asked to vote for our mayoral candidates and our city council candidates, as well as a ballot proposal to renew funding for Oakland Community College. You may find information on the candidates in the League of Women's voter guide, as well as on our website, vote411.org. This is a nonpartisan site that will give information about candidates and the proposals. This forum will be rebroadcast on CMN TV, video on demand, and video streaming via the League of Women Voter Troy area website. You may find more information by checking local listing for dates and times. Again, we thank you for participating, and please remember to vote on November 5th. Thank you.